The rain poured down in sheets, turning the streets into a blur of gray and silver. Cars splashed through puddles, their tires hissing against the wet asphalt. Pedestrians hurried along the sidewalks, clutching umbrellas tightly as if they were shields against not just the rain but also the world around them. Among the chaos stood an old man, drenched from head to toe, his thin coat clinging to his frail body like a second skin. He leaned heavily on a wooden cane, its tip tapping faintly against the ground as water dripped off his hat brim. His shoulders sagged under the weight of exhaustion, or perhaps something deeper, something unseen. No one stopped to look at him. No one even slowed down. To the crowd rushing by, he was invisible, a shadow blending into the stormy backdrop. Businessmen in sharp suits glanced away, pretending not to notice the soaked figure standing so close yet miles apart in their minds. Women with shopping bags stepped aside casually, murmuring complaints about the weather without sparing him a second thought. Teenagers laughed loudly as they ran past, their sneakers splashing muddy water onto his already ruined shoes. Even those who did catch a glimpse of him dismissed him instantly, assuming he was just another homeless person begging for scraps of humanity. But this wasn't entirely true. The old man wasn't holding out a cup or asking for anything. He simply stood there staring blankly at the pavement, as though waiting for something or someone to appear. His eyes were clouded, distant, as if he had seen too much of life and now carried the weight of it all within him. Every once in a while, a shiver would run through his body, and he'd wrap his arms tighter around himself, trying to keep warm, yet no one seemed to care. Not the young couple sharing an umbrella, not the delivery driver zooming by on his bike, not the well-dressed woman scrolling through her phone as she waited for the traffic light to change. Amidst the sea of indifference, there was one person who paused. Amina, a 12-year-old girl with dark braids and worn sneakers, hesitated at the edge of the sidewalk. She had been carrying a bag of groceries meant for her neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, whose arthritis made trips to the store impossible. Her own jacket was barely keeping her dry, and the plastic bag in her hands was starting to tear under the strain of the heavy cans inside. Still, when her gaze landed on the old man, something inside her tugged sharply, pulling her attention away from everything else. Amina didn't know why she felt drawn to him. Maybe it was the way his shoulders trembled, not just from the cold, but from something deeper, something unspoken. Or maybe it was the loneliness etched into every line of his face, a loneliness that mirrored her own in ways she couldn't fully understand. Whatever it was, she couldn't ignore it. For a moment, she glanced at her watch, knowing she was already late. Her mother had warned her about being punctual. Time was money, and they didn't have much of either. But then she looked back at the old man, and her feet moved almost instinctively toward him. "Sir?" she called softly, her voice barely audible over the sound of the rain. The old man didn't respond at first, lost in his own thoughts. Amina took a step closer, her heart pounding. "Sir, are you okay?" This time he turned to face her. His eyes were pale blue, watery and tired, but there was a flicker of surprise in them, as if he hadn't expected anyone to speak to him. Up close, Amina could see how thin he was, how fragile his hands looked gripping the handle of his cane. His lips parted slightly, as though he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Instead, he nodded weakly, though his trembling frame told a different story. Without thinking twice, Amina reached into her pocket and pulled out the scarf she'd been saving. It wasn't much, just a simple cotton scarf her teacher had given her last winter. But it was warm, and right now, warmth was what mattered most. "Here," she said, holding it out to him. "You can use this." The old man stared at the scarf for a long moment before accepting it with shaking hands. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice hoarse and barely audible. He wrapped it around his neck carefully, as if handling something precious. Then, for the first time that day, a small, grateful smile appeared on his lips. Amina felt a lump rise in her throat. She wanted to say more, to ask if he needed help getting somewhere or if he had a place to stay, but the words stuck in her mouth. Instead, she offered him her hand. "Come on," she said gently. "Let's get you out of the rain." For a brief second, The old man hesitated as if unsure whether to trust her. But then he placed his hand in hers, his grip surprisingly strong despite his frail appearance. Together they began walking toward a nearby shelter, leaving behind the bustling street and the countless people who had chosen to look the other way. As they disappeared into the distance, none of the passers-by gave them a second glance. They were too busy navigating their own lives, too caught up in their own struggles to notice the quiet exchange that had taken place. But for Amina and the old man, that moment was the beginning of something neither of them could have anticipated. A connection forged in the simplest act of kindness, a spark of hope ignited amidst the storm. Little did Amina know, the man whose hand she held was far more than he appeared to be. And little did the world know, this small, selfless gesture would ripple outward, changing lives in ways no one could predict. The old man's hand felt surprisingly steady in Amina's, despite the tremors that had earlier betrayed his frailty. As they walked side by side through the rain-soaked streets, she noticed how he leaned on her slightly for support, his cane tapping rhythmically against the wet pavement. The noise blended with the patter of raindrops and the distant hum of traffic, creating a strange sort of harmony, one that made Amina feel oddly connected to this stranger who had been invisible to everyone else. "Where are we going?" the old man asked finally, breaking the silence between them. His voice was soft but carried a hint of curiosity, as though he hadn't expected anyone to care enough to lead him anywhere. "There's a shelter just a few blocks away," Amina replied, glancing up at him briefly before focusing again on navigating the slick sidewalks. "It's warm there and you can dry off." He nodded slowly, his eyes scanning the street ahead as if trying to piece together where he was, or perhaps where he had come from. There was a sadness in his gaze, a heaviness that seemed to weigh down not just his body, but also his spirit. Amina wanted to ask him questions. Who was he? Why was he out here alone? But something about his quiet demeanor told her it wasn't the right time. Instead, she tightened her grip on his hand, silently letting him know she was there. When they reached the shelter, a small community center tucked between two taller buildings, Amina pushed open the door and ushered him inside. The warmth hit them instantly, a stark contrast to the biting chill outside. The air smelled faintly of coffee and damp clothes, mingling with the low murmur of voices. A few people sat scattered around the room, some reading newspapers, others dozing off in chairs, and a couple chatting quietly near the window. No one paid much attention to the newcomers, which suited Amina just fine. She guided the old man to an empty chair near the heater and helped him sit down. "Wait here," she said, giving him a reassuring smile. "I'll get you something warm to drink." At the counter, a volunteer handed her a steaming cup of tea. When she returned, the old man was staring into the distance, his fingers absently tracing the edge of the scarf she'd given him. He looked up as she approached, his expression softening when he saw the cup in her hands. "Thank you," he said, taking the tea carefully. For the first time since they'd met, his voice held a note of genuine gratitude. He took a slow sip, closing his eyes for a moment as the warmth spread through him. Then, almost reluctantly, he began to speak. "My name is Mr. Whitaker," he said, setting the cup down on a nearby table. His tone was measured, deliberate, as though each word required effort. "I haven't always been like this. Like you see me now." Amina tilted her head, intrigued. "What do you mean?" Mr. Whitaker hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor. "Once upon a time I had a family, a home, a life." He paused, his jaw tightening as if wrestling with memories too painful to share. "But things change. People leave. And sometimes—" His voice trailed off, but Amina didn't need him to finish, him to. She understood loss all too well. The absence of her father, the struggles her mother faced every day. It was a language she knew without words. "I'm sorry," she said softly, her heart aching for him. "That must have been hard," he nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, it was. But life goes on, doesn't it? Whether we want it to or not." For a while, neither of them spoke. The sounds of the shelter filled the silence, The clinking of cups, the rustle of pages turning, the occasional cough or laugh. Amina watched Mr. Whitaker closely, studying the lines etched into his face, the weariness in his posture. Despite everything, there was still a flicker of dignity about him, a quiet strength that refused to be extinguished. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Mr. Whitaker reached into the pocket of his coat and pulled out a crumpled business card. He held it out to Amina, his hand trembling slightly. "Take this," he said, his voice firm despite the fragility of his body. "If you ever need anything, if you're ever in trouble, you can come find me." Amina frowned, confused. She glanced at the card, noting the elegant font and the logo embossed at the top, Whitaker Enterprises. Beneath it was a name, Evan Whitaker, and a phone number. She looked back at him, unsure what to say. What could someone like her possibly need from someone like him? It's just... Mr. Whitaker continued, sensing her hesitation. "You've done more for me today than most people have in years. I don't forget kindness, even when the world does." Touched by his sincerity, Amina accepted the card and tucked it carefully into her pocket. She didn't fully understand why he was giving it to her, but she promised herself she wouldn't lose it. Something about the way he looked at her. As if she mattered. As if her simple act of compassion had shifted something inside him, made her feel important in a way she rarely did. As the rain outside began to ease, Amina realized she needed to leave. Mrs. Johnson would be wondering where her groceries were, and her mother would worry if she didn't return soon. Reluctantly, she stood up, brushing off her damp jeans. "I should go," she said, meeting Mr. Whitaker's gaze. "Will you be okay here?" He smiled faintly, a shadow of the vibrant man he might have once been. "I'll be fine. Thank you, Amina, for everything." She nodded, feeling a lump rise in her throat. "Take care of yourself, Mr. Whitaker." With that, she turned and walked toward the door, the weight of the business card in her pocket reminding her of the bond they had formed in such a short time. Outside, the clouds were beginning to break, allowing slivers of sunlight to peek through. As Amina stepped onto the sidewalk, she couldn't shake the feeling that her encounter with the old man had changed something. Not just for him, but for her too. Little did she know, the card in her pocket would become a key to a future she could never have imagined. For now, though, she simply walked on, her mind replaying the events of the day and wondering what tomorrow might bring. Weeks passed after that rainy afternoon, and life returned to its usual rhythm for Amina. Schoolwork piled up, her part-time job delivering groceries kept her busy, and her mother's constant reminders about being responsible echoed in her ears, daily. Yet no matter how hectic her days became, the memory of Mr. Whitaker lingered in her mind like a quiet whisper. She often found herself thinking about him, his tired eyes, his gentle smile, the way he had clung to her hand as though it were a lifeline. And then there was the business card tucked safely in her pocket, untouched but never forgotten. At first, Amina wasn't sure what to do with it. The idea of reaching out felt strange, almost intrusive. After all, she had only met the man once, and their interaction had been brief. What could she possibly say? "Hi, remember me? I gave you my scarf." It sounded silly even in her head. Still, every time she reached into her pocket and felt the worn edges of the card, guilt gnawed at her. What if Mr. Whitaker needed help again? What if he was still struggling? She couldn't shake the thought that maybe, just maybe, she owed it to him to try. One particularly difficult evening, when money was tight and her mother's worried sighs filled their tiny apartment, Amina made up her mind. She pulled out the card and stared at it under the dim light of her bedside lamp. The logo seemed fancier than anything she'd ever seen before, and the name Whitaker Enterprises sounded important. Too important for someone like her, but desperation pushed aside doubt. If anyone could offer guidance or assistance, perhaps this mysterious Mr. Whitaker could. With trembling hands, she copied the address onto a scrap of paper and resolved to visit the next day after school. The following afternoon, Amina stood outside the towering skyscraper listed on the card. her heart pounding so loudly she was sure everyone around her could hear it. The building loomed above her, its glass facade reflecting the cloudy sky like a mirror. People dressed in polished suits streamed in and out of the revolving doors, clutching briefcases and speaking into phones. Amina felt completely out of place in her faded jeans and scuffed sneakers, clutching the grocery bag she hadn't had time to drop off at home. For a moment, she considered turning back, convinced she didn't belong here. But then she remembered Mr. Whitaker's words. "If you ever need anything, come find me." Summoning every ounce of courage, Amina approached the security desk inside the lobby. The guard behind the counter looked up, his expression shifting from polite indifference to mild suspicion as he took in her appearance. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone clipped. "I'm looking for Mr. Whitaker," Amina replied, her voice steadier than she expected. "Evan Whitaker." The guard raised an eyebrow. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," she admitted, clutching the strap of her bag tighter. "But he told me to come if I needed help. He gave me this." She held out the crumpled business card, hoping it would prove something, anything, that would get her past the imposing barrier of professionalism. The guard studied the card skeptically, then glanced at her again. Clearly unconvinced, he picked up the phone and muttered something too low for Amina to hear. A few tense minutes passed, during which Amina shifted uncomfortably, wondering if she should leave before making a fool of herself. Just as she was about to apologize and retreat, the elevator doors opened and a tall man in a sharp suit stepped out. "Amina?" the man called, his voice warm yet authoritative. She recognized him immediately. It was Mr. Whitaker, though he looked entirely different from the frail figure she had met weeks ago. Today he wore an impeccably tailored suit, his silver hair neatly combed, his posture upright and commanding. Gone was the shivering old man who had leaned on her for support. In his place stood someone who exuded power and confidence. "Yes, sir," Amina stammered, suddenly feeling more out of place than ever. I wasn't sure if I should come, but you said—" "You did exactly what I asked," Mr. Whitaker interrupted gently, his lips curving into a small smile. "Come with me." He led her to a private office on one of the upper floors, a space so luxurious it took Amina's breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city skyline, while sleek furniture and shelves lined with books created an atmosphere of sophistication. Mr. Whitaker gestured for her to sit in one of the plush chairs across from his desk, then settled into his own seat, studying her with a mix of curiosity and admiration. "So," he began, leaning forward slightly, "what brings you here today?" Amina hesitated, unsure where to start. How could she explain her family's struggles without sounding pitiful? How could she convey her gratitude for his kindness without overstepping boundaries? Finally, she decided honesty was the best approach. "My mom and we've been having a hard time lately," she admitted, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "Money's tight and I don't know what else to do. I thought maybe—" Her voice trailed off, but Mr. Whitaker nodded encouragingly. "Go on," he urged. "I thought maybe you could give me some advice," she finished quickly. "Or point me in the right direction. Anything would help." Mr. Whitaker sat back, in his chair, his expression thoughtful. For a long moment he didn't speak, and Amina braced herself for rejection. Surely someone as successful as him had better things to do than listen to a poor girl's problems. But instead of dismissing her, he surprised her with a question. "Tell me about yourself, Amina. What are your dreams? Your goals?" Caught off guard, Amina blinked. No one had ever asked her that before, at least not seriously. Most people assumed she'd grow up to work odd jobs like her mother, trapped in the cycle of poverty. But Mr. Whitaker's gaze was earnest, as if he truly wanted to know. "Well," she started slowly, "I want to go to college someday. Maybe study business or engineering. Something that'll let me take care of my mom and make a difference." Mr. Whitaker smiled approvingly. "Good. Ambition is rare these days, and intelligence, you clearly have both." Amina ducked her head, unused to compliments. "Thank you, sir." Over the next hour they talked about everything. Her school, her hopes for the future, the challenges she faced. Mr. Whitaker listened intently, nodding occasionally and asking insightful questions. By the end of their conversation, Amina felt lighter, as if sharing her burdens had lifted some of the weight off her shoulders. Then, just as she prepared to leave, Mr. Whitaker handed her a check. "What's this?" she asked, staring at the amount written in neat handwriting. It was more money than she'd ever seen in her life. "It's a start," he said simply. "For your education, your family, whatever you need. Consider it an investment, not in you, but in the future you're going to build." Tears welled up in Amina's eyes as she tried to protest. "I can't accept this. You've already done so much." "You can, and you will," Mr. Whitaker insisted firmly. "Because I believe in you, Amina. Because you reminded me of something I'd forgotten. That kindness still exists in this world. Now go. Make me proud." As Amina left the office, clutching the check tightly, she realized this was more than just financial help. It was hope. It was validation. And most importantly, it was proof that even in the darkest moments, a single act of compassion could change lives, including her own. The check Mr. Whitaker had given Amina became the cornerstone of a new chapter in her life. Though it wasn't just the money that transformed her world, it was the belief he had placed in her. For the first time, someone outside her family saw potential in her, someone who didn't dismiss her dreams as impossible or unrealistic. That knowledge fueled her determination like nothing else ever had. With the financial burden lifted, Amina threw herself into her studies, working harder than she ever thought possible. Her grades soared and teachers began to take notice of the bright, driven girl who always sat at the front of the class, her hand raised eagerly to answer questions. But Mr. Whitaker didn't stop there. He became more than just a benefactor. He became a mentor, guiding her every step of the way. Every few weeks he would invite her to his office, not to lecture her but to listen. To her ideas, her struggles, her aspirations. They talked about everything: how to manage finances, the importance of networking, and even the value of failure. "Mistakes are lessons," he often told her. "Don't fear them. Learn from them." His words stuck with her, shaping not only her academic journey but also her outlook on life. Under his guidance, Amina's confidence grew. She joined after-school programs, participated in science fairs, and even started tutoring younger students in her neighborhood. The once shy girl who hesitated to speak up in class blossomed into a leader among her peers. People began to see her as someone to look up to, someone who could inspire others to dream bigger and work harder. Yet despite her growing success, Amina never forgot where she came from. She carried her mother's sacrifices and Mr. Whitaker's lessons with her wherever she went, determined to honor both. As the years passed, Amina graduated high school at the top of her class and earned a scholarship to a prestigious university, a feat that brought tears to her mother's eyes and pride to Mr. Whitaker's heart. But their bond didn't end there. If anything, it deepened. During college breaks, Amina would visit Mr. Whitaker, sharing stories of her experiences and seeking his advice on navigating the challenges of higher education. He encouraged her to pursue internships, introducing her to influential figures in various industries, and helping her build connections that would shape her career. One summer, during an internship at a tech startup, Amina found herself fascinated by the intersection of technology and social impact. She spent countless hours brainstorming ways to use innovation to uplift marginalized communities, ideas inspired by her own upbringing and the struggles she'd witnessed firsthand. When she shared these thoughts with Mr. Whitaker, his eyes lit up with excitement. "That's it," he said, leaning forward in his chair. "That's your purpose. Use what you've learned to give back." With his encouragement, Amina founded a nonprofit organization aimed at providing resources and opportunities to underprivileged youth. The initiative started small, offering free coding workshops and mentorship programs in local schools. But word spread quickly, and soon, businesses and philanthropists were eager to support her mission. Mr. Whitaker, of course, was one of the first to contribute, not just financially but also by lending his expertise and influence to help her grow the project. Through it all, their relationship evolved into something akin to family. To Amina, Mr. Whitaker wasn't just a mentor, he was the grandfather figure she had never known. And to him, she was the granddaughter he wished he still had, a reminder that love and connection could transcend bloodlines. Together they built something extraordinary, a partnership rooted in mutual respect, trust, and a shared vision for a better future. Years later, when Amina stood on stage accepting an award for her contributions to education and community development, she dedicated the honor to two people. First, she said, her voice trembling with emotion, to my mother, whose strength kept us going through the hardest times. And second, to Mr. Evan Whitaker, who believed in me when I barely believed in myself. Without him, none of this would have been possible. The audience erupted in applause, but Amina's mind drifted back to that rainy day years ago, the day she had taken the hand of a seemingly ordinary old man and unknowingly changed both their lives forever. It was proof that kindness, no matter how small, could ripple outward, touching hearts and transforming destinies in ways no one could predict. And yet, as fulfilling as her achievements were, Amina knew the greatest reward lay not in accolades or recognition, but in the legacy they had created together, a legacy of compassion, resilience, and hope. Little did she know, however, that their story was far from over. There were still chapters waiting to be written, lessons waiting to be learned, and moments waiting to unfold that would cement their bond in ways neither of them could foresee. Years had passed since that fateful rainy day when Amina first met Mr. Whitaker, and in the time between, their lives had become intertwined in ways neither of them could have imagined. Amina had grown into a confident, accomplished woman, a beacon of hope for countless others whose lives she touched through her nonprofit work. Her organization had expanded beyond local schools to reach communities across the country, offering scholarships, mentorship programs, and workshops designed to empower young people from underserved backgrounds. She was no longer just the girl who delivered groceries. She was a leader, an innovator, and a symbol of resilience. But even as her star continued to rise, Amina never lost sight of where it all began. Every milestone she achieved felt incomplete without sharing it with Mr. Whitaker, the man who had believed in her when the world seemed indifferent. Their bond remained unshaken, a testament to the power of kindness and gratitude. They spoke often, whether over coffee in his office or during long phone calls late at night. He shared stories of his past, the triumphs and failures that had shaped him, and listened intently as she recounted her own journey. To Amina, he wasn't just a benefactor or mentor. He was family. Then one day, everything changed. Amina received a call early in the morning from Mr. Whitaker's assistant. His voice was somber, tinged with urgency. "Ms. Amina," he said, "Mr. Whitaker has taken a turn. He's asked to see you." Her heart sank as she rushed to the hospital, memories flooding back like waves crashing against the shore. The frail old man in the rain, the warmth of his smile, the crumpled business card. It all came rushing back, reminding her how much he meant to her. When she arrived, she found him lying in a hospital bed, his once commanding presence diminished by illness. Yet when he saw her, his eyes lit up, and a faint smile crossed his lips. "Amina," he whispered, reaching out weakly. She took his hand, holding it gently as tears welled up in her eyes. "I'm here," she said softly. "I'm not going anywhere." For hours they talked, or rather he spoke, and she listened. He recounted fragments of his life, the highs of building his empire, the lows of losing loved ones, and the emptiness that followed until she had reminded him of humanity's goodness. Then, with a seriousness that made her chest tighten, he revealed something unexpected. "When I'm gone," he said, his voice steady despite his condition, "everything I have will go to you. My fortune, my businesses, all of it. But more importantly, my legacy is yours to carry forward." Amina shook her head, overwhelmed. "No, sir. You've already done so much for me. I can't." "You can," he interrupted firmly. "And you will. Because you understand what truly matters. Wealth means nothing if it isn't used to heal wounds and create opportunities. You've shown me that, Amina. Now it's your turn to show the world." His words echoed in her mind long after. He drifted off to sleep. The weight of his trust settled heavily on her shoulders, but it wasn't a burden. It was a responsibility, one she vowed to honor with every fiber of her being. Weeks later, Mr. Whitaker passed away peacefully, surrounded by those who loved him most. The news sent shockwaves through the city, as headlines celebrated the life of the self-made billionaire who had quietly devoted his final years to uplifting others. For Amina, the loss was profound. Grief wrapped around her like a heavy blanket, but amidst the sorrow, there was also clarity. She realized that Mr. Whitaker's death wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. It was her chance to ensure his vision lived on, to amplify the values he had instilled in her: compassion, integrity, and purpose. With the resources left to her, Amina expanded her nonprofit exponentially, creating initiatives that reached global audiences. She partnered with schools, governments, and corporations to tackle issues ranging from poverty to educational inequality. Under her leadership, the organization became synonymous with innovation and impact, inspiring generations to dream bigger and aim higher. But beyond the accolades and achievements, Amina stayed true to the core principle Mr. Whitaker had taught her. Real wealth lies not in money, but in the lives we touch. To honor his memory, she established the Whitaker Legacy Fund, a scholarship program specifically for students from marginalized communities. Each recipient was chosen not only based on merit, but also on their commitment to giving back, a reflection of the cycle of kindness that had started with a simple act years ago. At the inaugural ceremony, Amina stood before a crowd of eager faces and shared the story of the old man in the rain. "He taught me that everyone has value," she said, her voice steady, yet filled with emotion. "That even the smallest gesture of kindness can change a life. And that true success isn't measured by what we accumulate, but by what we contribute." As she spoke, she felt Mr. Whitaker's presence beside her, guiding her as he always had. Though he was no longer physically there, his spirit lived on in every child who dared to dream because someone believed in them, in every community transformed by opportunity, in every heart touched by compassion. Years later, when Amina looked back on her journey, she realized that her encounter with Mr. Whitaker hadn't just changed her life, it had ignited a chain reaction of hope and healing that spanned continents and generations. What began as a single moment of kindness had grown into a movement, proving that love and generosity have the power to transcend boundaries and reshape the world. And so, the girl who once stood unnoticed in the shadow of society's indifference became a light for others, a reminder that even in our darkest moments we possess the ability to spark change. Through her actions, Amina ensured that Mr. Whitaker's legacy would endure, not as a tale of wealth amassed, but as a story of lives uplifted, dreams fulfilled, and hearts united by the simple yet extraordinary act of caring for one another.